Lots of interesting things happening this week in cybersecurity. This week I have 5 interesting stories, mostly centered around improper and bad behavior of companies and people that are causing cybersecurity problems. From missing multi-factor authentication to researchers being threatened, Google having 2FA flaw for years and years, medical devices running operating systems that are ancient and unpatchable, and hackers themselves being hacked. All this on This Week in Cybersecurity with me, the Code Curmudgeon. Multi-factor authentication. Microsoft did some research that they put out recently talking about how many hacks they see where accounts are breached, but they didn't use the tools available to them. Now, I presume that this is only related to Microsoft's users, but I suspect that their users are no different than other users. And what they found out is that 99.9% of accounts involved in hacks after breaches are not using some form of multi-factor authentication. So let's take an aside for a second and talk about multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is a way to make sure that you are who you say you are beyond just your username and password. So MFA has its shorthand called, sometimes 2FA for two-factor authentication, which implies just one extra factor, involves an extra bit of connection to you. So it might be a device on your smartphone and they send a code to your smartphone. It might be a text message with a special code for you to log in once you've given the correct password. It might be an email to a specific account, but some way beyond the username and password to make sure that you are who you say you are. And this is great because it means that it's pretty easy to be sure in most cases that bad people aren't logging into your accounts. There are ways to bypass it, but for the most part, it's definitely better than not having it. And some of the methods, like Microsoft has a special authenticator that's really cool because when you connect it to Microsoft Office accounts, it basically sends you a little message that says approve or deny this. So you just click yes or no. You don't have to type extra numbers, which I really like. But these systems overall, it's great because if someone's trying to log into my Microsoft account, I'm going to start getting these messages. And if I'm not trying to log in, I'm aware that not only is someone trying to hack my account, but they have my password or I wouldn't be getting these messages. So it's time to change my password instantly. So it's generally a good idea to have multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, 2FA, get an authenticator app or set it up for text messages or whatever it is. So the Microsoft report, 99% of the breached accounts, right, having no form of multi-factor authentication. So there's some interesting numbers. They log more than 30 billion login events a day from more than 1 billion monthly active users. And they found out that even the enterprise accounts, meaning not your personal Microsoft Office stuff, but your Office 365 account through work, only 11% of enterprise accounts are being protected by multi-factor authentication. So if you're one of those companies where they don't require some form of secondary authentication with your Microsoft Office account, maybe point it out to them. There's a link down below to the research and to the story itself. One other thing that Microsoft pointed out here is that what happens is that these big data breaches that have usernames and sometimes passwords, but usernames and logins, and then they try to do these password spraying attacks. And password spraying is where they essentially have your login, like your email address, and then they start just trying passwords against it. Now, it's up to the vendor to make sure that if someone keeps trying different passwords to try to slow them down or even lock the account. But it's also up to us to make sure that our passwords aren't stupid, easy ones that everyone uses. And we've talked about that recently, I think last week and the week before. I'll put both the links up, so, check that out. How to make your password better and the reason why you shouldn't use crappy passwords. Let's talk about a bug researcher being threatened with a lawsuit. Now, the story in the link down below is for Talkspace, and my point in covering this story, it's not about Talkspace, so please don't come and threaten me with a lawsuit too, because I'm just reporting facts here. And my goal, again, is to point out how they handled this, what the problem was, and what their response was, because their response of ignoring good information, and in this case, in fact, trying to shut down the messenger rather than fix the problem, is what we should and can learn from. So what happened is they have a system where people who apparently are employees of customers or clients or things like that can log in and create an account and use their services. And so what happened is the researcher was looking at the site and didn't really see the expected security validation mechanisms for making sure that when people go to create accounts, that they really belong to the organization they say they belong to. So he finally tried it, logged in, created an account. For a full month, the account's still working. So he talked to the organization in question. They ignored him. He got some advice from TechCrunch, wrote up a blog and posted it about, what they were and weren't doing and how you could get into the site. And instead of getting a response that, hey, can you hold off on publishing that? Let us fix it first. Or thank you for your help. Or here's a free year's membership. He got a nasty letter from a lawyer saying that he was slandering the organization and he needed to immediately desist. I wish this was unique behavior, but it's just not. This has been happening for at least a decade. When the TPMS sensors in your tires, that little tire pressure sensor that warns you when you have a low tire, was first discovered to be hackable, there was this huge thing between multiple automotive manufacturers trying to make sure that the story couldn't get out there, rather than trying to fix the problem. They call this fix the blame, not the problem. You're supposed to fix the problem, not the blame. They've got it backward. So this is just one of those stupid things. There are so-called white hats out there, security researchers that are doing this for their own buck. They're doing it to be able to sell exploits to foreign governments, to criminal organizations, or even to the US government, who does buy exploits. And there are people who are just curious and trying to do things, and they're frustrated when they find a real problem and the company not only doesn't fix it, but goes after them legally. It's just not the right response. The company has a known security problem. It's been published and now republished and potentially republished. They need to just go fix it. And the right response isn't to threaten a lawsuit against the researcher, is to say thank you. He's one of the good guys. Google Authenticator app. We talked a moment ago about multi-factor authentication and the fact that there's a thing called an authenticator app. You install it on your smartphone, and then you use something like a QR code to connect it to a specific website. Maybe you're connecting it to your Dropbox account or to your Microsoft Office account. And as it turns out, when you create apps in Android and iOS, there's a way to tell the operating system that what you're doing is private and screenshots shouldn't be allowed. And I'm not just talking about screenshots like me as a user saving a picture of the code so I can remember it. I'm talking about other apps being connected to the app and say, hey, I want a screenshot of what you have. Because basically, if you can do this, then you can have an app on the phone that sits there when you use the authenticator, can take a picture of all the codes and then try to log into those accounts. So it's pretty dangerous. And here's the bad behavior part of this. Somebody figured this out years and years ago, like 2014, I think it was. I'll make sure it's down in the notes in the description. It was reported that this could happen. Google did nothing. Again, years later, 2017, it was reported they did nothing. So this is one of those bugs that's persisted for years and years until they finally fix it. And it's just stupid. Like, they know there's a GitHub bug report that actually shows the evidence of this, and I'll either show it now or I showed it a few minutes ago. I said at the beginning, this is about bad behavior. You have known security vulnerabilities. You know what happens? Usually companies try to figure out, well, can it really happen? What can really happen? How hard is it for it to happen? What will be the outcome of it happening, rather than just fixing this stupid thing? It's stupid. Like, just fix it. Come on. And oh yeah, one more thing on authenticator apps. The same researchers found out that the Microsoft app on Android has exactly the same problem. I don't know if Microsoft was notified the same way, but again, it's a really simple mistake to make in cybersecurity. But when you found out, you should fix it. Medical imaging devices. Recent research from Palo Alto Networks shows that 83% of medical devices are running operating systems that are so old that they're no longer supported by the manufacturer. Now, we're not just talking, say, an old version of Windows 10 or Windows 8. I have no idea if Windows 8 is supported. Like, why are you running it? Windows 7 was recently end of life by Microsoft, making a whole bunch of new devices vulnerable. Okay, the device doesn't instantly break when the software is end of life, but it means that bad guys are going to still keep trying to break into these devices, and they're going to publish their information. The difference is that good guys are going to stop fixing it when they find out about these things. So 0 days are going to become infinite days, essentially. So, interesting, they did this research, and they researched over 1 million devices across enterprise IT and hospitals, and found out that over 50% of the devices they researched were vulnerable to either a medium or high severity attack. And they found out that 40% of the attacks that they researched, some form of device that was hacked was used as an entry point. And this is why this is interesting and important. We often think about IoT in the sense of, hey, somebody can, get in and turn off my light bulb, or they can, turn on my swimming pool pump, or they can change the thermostat in the office like Mr. Robot. I actually gave a talk at Cybersecurity LA a couple of years ago about jumping the fish tank. We tend to think that IoT devices being hacked aren't as big of a deal as it really is. And it turns out that you can get, from a light bulb to an entire city. You can get from a tire pressure sensor into taking over a car. You can get from a medical device into the mainframe at a hospital. And like in WannaCry, end up shutting down or using ransomware against all of their data, bringing the hospital to its knees. So it's super important. If you want to see more about that, it's kind of an entertaining presentation. We'll put a link up to it. We need to make sure that these devices are really protected. We need to update them where possible, make sure that manufacturers are committed to a reasonable time frame, make sure that, when I say manufacturers, I mean OS manufacturers, make sure that device manufacturers are using modern OSs so that they're not starting with something that's already really too old to really be used. And we need to make sure that where these devices have to be deployed because they're expensive and need to last a long time, that they're well protected, not just a simple firewall on the regular network with everything else, but protected on a separate subnet with extreme protections and firewalls, etc., that there's no way to transfer from, the mainframe network to the medical imaging network in an easy way from the devices. So it's dangerous, it's scary, and we've got to start doing a better job. And finally, hackers getting hacked through their own hacking tools. It's not good that I laugh at certain cybersecurity incidents, but I can't help but laugh at this. A little bit of schadenfreude that the bad guys are getting attacked. So as it turns out, there's a lot of really common tools that people use for hacking, and some of them are dual purpose. They might have a legitimate proper use, and they might have a way to use them illegitimately. In fact, probably most tools fall into that category. Some of them are just nasty little tools that are designed to hurt people, right? To break into websites, to gather data, to, tear things down and things like that. And unsurprisingly, these tools are available in various places on the internet. We might say the dark web, but it's just websites, okay? Like they're WordPress sites that have these tools available. So what happened is that someone started taking some of these tools, pulling them down. Some of them are open source, right? It's very common for these tools to be open source. And so someone took these tools, started taking them down, inserting other Trojan code inside it, like spyware code, malicious malware code, ability to remotely control a device code. And when the hacker downloads the software, they get this little bad thing inside it. And now this third party can take over their devices. So the story really would be funny if this was a good guy inserting, something that exposed every bad guy hacker to the world. Unfortunately, it looks like it was, a malicious third party. There's some rumors that maybe it was Vietnam. I have no idea, so I'm just not going to go there. But certainly it was somebody with malicious intent doing a bunch of different tools. And, you know, part of me just laughs because hackers getting hacked by their own tools is just funny. But it also points out a real problem that I haven't talked about too much here, but the software supply chain. And the best question I can have you ask is, if you're using an open source tool, you know, you're using MySQL or you're using Apache or whatever it is you're using that's open source, how do you know that it's the right one? In other words, did you build it yourself from the code? Did you check that the code that you downloaded was a proper version? Has it been analyzed by others? Usually there's a code that makes sure that a download hasn't been tampered with. Did you check that code? Where did you even get the thing from, right? Did you go to some random website that aggregates random third-party open source tools and get it? It's funny because this sounds obvious, but when you ask developers, you're going to find out that a lot of times open source is being pulled from pretty weird places. There's a secondary issue which is way scarier, which is where someone can go, for example, to a GitHub repository and start injecting bad code along with some other changes and no one notices it. But the basic thing about supply chain is when you're using, you know, like third-party libraries and things like that, make sure you know the source you're getting them from, and make sure you're keeping patches on them up to date, and make sure you use those checksum codes to be sure that the version you have is the blessed version. So, you know, be safe out there. So that's it for today. Thumbs up if you liked the video. Let me know in the comments if you've got things you'd like to hear about, story ideas for the future, big things going on that I didn't notice for some reason. Subscribe, hit the bell to make sure you're getting the latest updates. And like always, stay safe out there.